Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first in our Birdability Outreach Program webinar series for the 2024-2025 season. We are so grateful that you are here and spending time with us today. I wanted to welcome you. My name is Kat Fribley. I'm the executive director here at Birdability. I am thrilled to be able to host this really lovely space monthly on the second Wednesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be hosting webinars from now through June of 2025. And that is all thanks to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation and a grant that we've received from their Quality of Life grant program. And we are so delighted to be in partnership with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, to be in learning together, and to be able to share as we move through this entire Birdability Outreach Program webinar series, to be able to share more and more with folks across the country and beyond about ways that accessible birding can make our lives more joyful, create community. And through the concept of accessible and inclusive birding, we are also working to create more access in the world for people with disabilities and other chronic health concerns. If you would like to use closed captioning today, there is a button at the bottom of your screen that says Show Captions. And if you click on that, captions are enabled. If you're using a screen reader today, I wanted to let you know that we have allowed for you to disable chat in your screen reader should you want to, so that you are not having to hear the chat as we're having this discussion. And if you would like to leave it enabled, we encourage you to do that. I will again introduce myself, Kat Fribley. I'm the director here at Birdability. I am I would say, fat, white, middle-aged woman with purple hair up in two buns. I have very sparkly glasses, and behind me are some green plants and a red wall. In order to create the most access possible for those who are joining us, we offer any number of different access options, including visual descriptions, which at least one participant has requested. We would also provide ASL upon request, and we have the captions, of course, that you can turn on below using Zoom by clicking on the button that says CC and Show Captions. If there are other things that would make this program more accessible to you, or our programming more accessible to you in the broadest way, I invite you to please be in touch with me at kat@birdability.org so that we can make sure to create a space in which all of us have the access features that we need to be able to be in full community. So I am thrilled that you all are here. I want to thank the Reeve Foundation again. It is, again, thanks to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation that the Birdability Outreach Program has been funded. And we will be working, I want to share just a little bit about the Birdability Outreach Program. We will be working to share the joy of birding with folks with disabilities and other chronic health concerns in congregate living facilities across the United States. And that means assisted living, rehabilitation hospitals, mental health facilities, and any other place where folks are living and would benefit from having access to birds. When people cannot go to the birds, we want to bring the bird to them. And so this will be an opportunity to help them access birds through informal feeder programs, through adaptive birding equipment that we're able to supply, thanks to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation and other sponsors like Bird Feed by NetView. And so I want to then take the opportunity to just thank Stephen for being here Thank Estelle for being here. Thank Burfie by NetView for investing, being a really early investor in this Birdability outreach program. And shortly, I'll drop into the chat a link to a blog post that describes in more detail how you can put forward a facility to be a part of the outreach program, and or how you could volunteer if you are interested in helping us to take the joy of birds to folks across the country. So, Stephen, I am really grateful you're here. You, I know, are joining us from the UK, so it's evening for you while it is daytime for many of us. I'm wondering, good evening. I'm
Good
wondering if
evening. Yeah, almost good night. It's very dark out here.
almost good night. I am wondering if you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you came to be involved with Burfie by NetView, and then share a little bit about what Burfie by NetView is doing right now in terms of technology assisted birding.
Absolutely, Kat. Well, thank you again for inviting me. We met,
Mhm.
didn't we, in Ohio
We
in
did.
May at the biggest week in American birding, you and Gary and some of your colleagues and my colleagues. And we hit it off immediately because I saw past the purple hair, Cat. Because I'm feeling jealous now. I have ordinary glasses with no
Right.
sparkle. I have grey hair because I've now reached the Beatles age when I'm 64.
Yes.
A song I used to listen to as a child and think, gosh, that's really old. I don't think that anymore. Um, I am an English, half Italian, actually, half Italian, half English, uh, late middle-aged man, I'd like to feel, without purple hair. I live in Somerset in the West Country of England. I lived most of my life until 20 years ago in London and in Cambridge, where I was at university. I've been a birder all my life, since before I can remember. At the age of 2 or 3, my mother, who was a single parent in those days, very unusual, and she would take me out to feed the ducks, and that was it. I got into birds, and I've been into birds ever since. And about, gosh, 30 years ago or so, about half a lifetime ago, I started turning my hobby into my job. I started first writing books on birds and then doing television programs.
Mm.
I made a program called Spring Watch, which actually used remote cameras for the first time. This is 20 years ago, and showed them on BBC television. It's still going. And you can, I think Kat's going to put a link to the
I
website.
am. I am.
And I, as I say, I was very lucky. I turned my hobby into my job. I written a number of lots of books actually, but the latest one's actually on the starling. It's a biography of the starling, which I know isn't a terribly popular bird in the USA and Canada. We quite like them. I live near one of the biggest murmurations, as they're called, of
Mm.
starlings in probably in the world, actually, about 250,000 starlings flying around the air. And last year I published a book called 10 Birds That Changed the World. This is the American paperback edition. It's published by Basic Books. But then also a couple of years ago, having made television programs on birds and then also taught nature writing in at a university called Bath Spa in England, I then decided to do slightly less. I was reaching an age where I thought I don't need to do as much anymore. I can spend more time watching birds. And then I got approached by a company called NetView Technologies, and they make the bird fee. And the
Mhm.
bird fee is a number of products, but mainly they are bird feeders which have a built-in, rather good quality camera that looks out. So you imagine I'm the camera looking out and I can see the birds coming in. Again, we'll put some links up so you can see
Yeah.
it. And the wonderful thing about BirdFee is that I can access it anywhere in the world. I get my iPhone, other smartphones are available, and I use my app and I can see live what's going on. I can see clips of videos from earlier in the day. It's motion sensitive, so if a bird comes, it tells me what it is, and I see a little video of it.
Mm.
And then what I really like is that they then have a whole section, mostly actually from birders in North America who own bird feed in their backyards. And it's clips of wonderful birds that you take for granted, like the northern cardinal or the blue jay or the hairy woodpecker or something, or red-bellied woodpecker, and I get very excited about because I don't see them very often. And I'm a consultant for bird feed, so I help advise them on the products, which we'll talk about later, and the technology. I promote them. I do blogs. You can go on their website and you can see blogs I've written. And we attend events like the biggest week in American birding and the Global Bird Fair in the UK. And we've launched recently a really lovely thing, which I'll talk about a bit more later probably, which is a thing called the Bird Feed Fund, where people can apply for a grant to do anything that connects birds with people and society. So any one of you can apply for that, because every time we sell a bird feed, we put $1 into the fund. So at the moment, there's $200,000 in there. Hopefully that will increase over the next few years. So yeah, it's been great. We also have a bird feed hummingbird, the bird feed hum, a hummingbird feeder for any of you in Arizona or Mexico or California or maybe in the
Or
East.
summers in Iowa,
Yeah, or
or
summers in
almost
Iowa.
anywhere, right? Yeah,
Excellent. Well,
absolutely.
we're very envious because we don't have hummingbirds, of course.
Oh.
And a bird feed nest, which is a nest box camera. So really, that's it. I've spent the last couple of years really enjoying working with this great team, including Estelle, my colleague, and promoting it. And we're hoping it'll really take off because, for reasons we'll talk about in a moment, Kat, I'm very excited about the things I don't expect about it that increase for me accessibility and inclusivity and sociability amongst birders, which is what you're all about. So
Which is
yeah,
what
that's it.
Birdability really is all about. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason, isn't it, Stephen, that we connected so quickly and immediately at the biggest week in American birding as we talked about what Birdability was trying to do. We, both of us, and Estelle and Gary and the others who were there, could immediately begin to think about how we might partner, because technology has allowed so much more access in many ways for folks with disabilities. And there are ways in which we can apply technology directly to increasing access for folks. And so I loved when you talked about, 20 years ago, you were using, tools already to make a TV program.
Yeah.
Our world has certainly grown and shifted in terms of the technologies that are available. I do want to just shout out that on our website, and I'll put this into the chat in a little bit, we have a page actually under our events, which is an opportunity for folks to check out some of our favorite technology assisted birding opportunities. Because when we think about technology assisted birding, I think, Stephen, you and I could probably come up with quite an amazing list. There are certainly those camera feeders, which are spectacular, right? But there are also all of these new ways that folks are able to bird by accessing nest cams, as you were talking about.
Yes.
I know many of us became full on obsessed with the eagle cams when they first came out. The joy of getting to watch eagles or osprey or red-tailed hawks, build a nest and raise their young, sit on the eggs, was just such a fantastic thing to be able to see up close something that had been such a far away sort of piece of bird life, and
Absolutely.
that has been such a joy. Tell me a little bit about how you imagine, and like the biggest sort of advantages about technology in terms of birding. I would love to hear about what you see coming down the pike and what you've already experienced.
Absolutely. Well, I think the fascinating thing is, of course, as a largely able-bodied person, I have had a few health issues recently,
Mhm,
so I've, been aware of these things.
mhm,
But of course, the vast majority of people are not very aware of the
mhm.
needs of people with various health issues or disabilities.
Absolutely.
We learned the hard way during COVID.
Mhm,
We were confined to home, and people started, they were bored, so they started
mhm.
finding, the Canopy Lodge webcam in Panama,
Absolutely.
or the, as you say, bald eagles or ospreys in Scotland,
Right.
Um, and I think that gave me certainly an awareness of the fact that confined to home, albeit artificially and only for 3 months, and I'm very lucky. I have a big garden and a big house,
Mhm,
and our family were all here. So, it for me, it wasn't a
mhm,
difficult time, but it made us realize, and I think bird feed
mhm,
took off really around that time, a
mhm.
little bit after that, a year or so after that, when I think they thought, well, hang on, people, there's obviously a demand for people
Yes.
either because they want to or because they have to. They can't
Right.
get out. They're not, people obviously with various particularly after COVID, health issues, which
Mhm,
meant that it was
mhm.
dangerous for them to go out, even if they physically
Absolutely.
could. And I think we've become aware. You mentioned the program I did 20 years ago. I mean, what was
Mhm,
astonishing is a few years before that, they'd done a similar program and they'd had cameramen, they were all men in those days, with a massive, great camera in the back of a bird's nest. And in 2003, when we first did it, we used the first security cameras, sort of
mm,
cameras you take for granted now, you see them
mhm.
everywhere.
Sure.
And we put those in nest boxes, bird boxes, and realized, of course, that they worked.
Mhm,
And people loved it. People in BBC television, they'd watched for many years, they'd watched lions in Africa and tigers and sharks. And we were showing them blue tits, which is the default common garden bird in Britain. And
mhm.
I hate to say this, I'm going to sound terrible, proper robins,
Proper robins, how dare
European
you?
robins. How
Our
dare me?
robins are just as proper as
Yeah,
yours.
I know you have lovely robins, even if they're thrushes.
You.
Turns out our robins are flycatchers, so it doesn't matter. But
Right.
anyway, but we would,
Mhm.
we realized that people wanted to look at common birds
Yes.
in their gardens,
Mhm,
and they were the stars of the show. It
mhm.
wasn't the rarities, it wasn't the ospreys and the eagles. It was seeing a pair of blue tits feeding their 12 young, taking back 1,000 caterpillars a day between them. Would they survive the weekend?
Right.
And it became a sort of soap opera
Mhm.
um, for people. And someone wrote a piece, a novelist in Britain wrote a piece for one of our big newspapers, The Guardian, saying the British have fallen in love with nature again. But what he actually meant was they'd fallen in love with their own backyard nature
Mhm,
rather than exotic foreign,
mhm,
which is
mhm,
wonderful. I mean, I love watching
mhm.
wildlife documentaries. So I think,
Absolutely.
that's the context of it. What, for me, the technology does now, and I have to admit, I'm the global consultant. I know nothing about how the technology works. My eldest son is a camera, well, he's a filmmaker. And he
Mhm,
looked at the camera, he said, "Oh, it's really good, Dad." I said, "Well, that's good because I don't know, but it's very good quality. It's a wide angle camera. It means you can see what's going on. You see the birds arrive. Sometimes in the stuff on our Facebook page, you actually see black bears arriving or
absolutely.
raccoons or whatever. In Britain, we get the odd squirrel. We don't get much
Mhm,
else.
mhm.
But you get really good stuff. And what's lovely is that anyone can access this. So if someone, some people are confined, obviously they're confined to bed, or they're in hospital, or
Mhm.
they're somewhere where you can't physically see
Yes.
their bird feeder, even if it's only
Mhm,
20 feet away, or it
mhm.
takes a lot of effort to do that. Well, this way it doesn't. You go on the camera, you press on the app, on the phone, sorry,
Absolutely.
and up it comes. And I was in Shenzhen, the headquarters in China, the headquarters of NetView back in February. And I was um, someone said, "Oh, how's your feeder working?" I said, "Oh, it's great. It's really good. Look, I'll check it now." Now I had forgotten it was 2 o'clock. It was midday, I think, in Shenzhen,
Mhm.
which meant it was about 3 o'clock in the morning in February in my garden, just out here from my office. And it came up. It's got a you can see it even in the
Mhm.
dark. It's got a light on it, and there was a robin on it at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in winter. No light. We live in the countryside, and that's when I thought, gosh, it's now showing me things that I didn't know were happening. And I think that's very
Absolutely.
special, you know. So I think,
Mhm.
you know, people get slightly, I get slightly terrified by technology. It's not about the technology, it's about what you can do with it. And
For
what I
sure.
can do this year, I've been to Australia and Costa Rica and Borneo and Malaysia uh, and Ohio and Guatemala, which has been a pretty good year. And I've been watching all these exotic, wonderful birds like quetzals and, you know, this sort of thing. And then I've been holding my phone and going, oh, the blue tits are back. Or, oh, there's a magpie on my feeder or a, you know, whatever. So it's great. It's been great.
I do love something that you just said made me think of it. Mary Oliver has that beautiful poem. Sometimes all I have to do is stand where I am to be astonished. And I
Yeah.
think one of the lovely things that, our backyard feeders, and especially these camera assisted backyard feeders can do is give us a much closer view than the birds might allow, right?
Yes.
If we ourselves were out there even. So there is this balance of it's a terrific thing for me, because the thing that is most accessible to me is backyard birding. And
Yes.
so I am able to, really enjoy backyard birds. With a Burfie camera, you can put it outside of I can put it outside of my view and suddenly see birds that would never come were I closer, right?
That's
Or
right.
were I watching because they would be startled off.
Yes.
And that is
And
one of my
also
favorite things.
you're seeing almost the feeder's point of view, which is
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah.
The new bird feed we've just brought out, it's literally just come out. It's beautiful. It's called Bird Feed 2, and it's got two cameras.
Yeah.
And when the team showed it to me this year, they said, "Oh, here's a video. We filmed a
Yeah.
little bit of it. We can show you what happens." And a bird landed as they do. The first camera is a wide angle. The second camera is a little bit closer. And the bird landed off to the left as I was looking. And the camera just went zzz
And was
and
able to
moved
follow.
and followed the bird. And it was within half a second. So the
Mhm.
bird landed and you were just aware there was a bird there and suddenly you could see
Mhm.
it. The hummingbird
Yeah.
feeder has two cameras on, one
Mhm.
side view, one front view. So again,
Yeah.
you know, so you feel you're almost in the bird's world,
Mhm.
which is
Absolutely.
it's something. And the other thing is you can show friends. You know, we all have friends who either aren't interested in birds or would like to be but haven't worked it out yet. And again, during COVID, I had so many phone calls and emails. It
Mhm.
was spring, of course, in Britain and
Mhm.
USA and Canada. And they asked two questions. They said, do birds always sing at this time of year? Because it was April, and of
Mhm.
course they were. And why? And then the
Mhm.
other one was, do they always sing so loudly?
Everybody
And
was noticing the bird loudness in the
exactly.
quiet of everything else.
Yeah, and you can hear the birds on the bird feed as well.
You bet.
You can also, I love this, you can talk to them. There is a microphone on it, and when we were, as you know, in Ohio, we had the privilege of seeing the wonderful novelist Amy Tan
Yes.
speaking, and we sent her a bird feed. And I'll be honest, we send bird feeds to lots of people like
Yeah.
that, very good
Yeah.
people, and we don't always hear from them. She
Sure.
got straight back. She said, I'm loving this. She said, but when the pigeon lands on there, I shout at him and he flies off because she doesn't want the pigeon. And I just thought that was hilarious. It hadn't occurred to me to do that
So
because I
she
get the
uses
same.
it as a an ability to essentially say, "Get
Yeah,
out of
yeah,
my yard,"
yeah.
to the
As
birds she doesn't want.
my wife was saying the other day, we keep getting wood pigeons and collared doves, which are nice, but we'd rather
Mhm.
have the smaller birds, you know. And I said, well, you need to try shouting. Because the other thing, you have a bird feed, you can set it up on several people's
Mhm.
phones.
So
So
more
again,
people can see.
so you may have a friend who doesn't have a backyard. You can
Mhm,
set it up on his or her
mhm,
phone. I'm not
mhm.
sure quite how many people you can have, but I think it's a few. Or they
Yeah,
can just go on to we have these wonderful Facebook groups where people
yeah.
post stuff, wonderful stuff all the time. I mean, just
That
incredible clips.
that makes me think, a couple things, Stephen, and those of you who are joining us, please put into the chat some of your favorite technologies, because I will tell you, I discovered something called Haiku Box, which is very similar to the sound piece that you're talking about in the Burfy feeder. But it is sound only. So you can
Yes.
install this listening box called a Haiku Box. There are many others as well, something called a Puck. Um, and you can install that, and then you can be alerted of what birds it is identifying
Mm.
the song or calls of in your yard. And the way that actually I have found that to be so incredibly useful is like when I'm waiting, for example, for the warblers to come, which warblers are arriving, I will often go to the Haiku Box website, and you can look at all of the Haiku Box out that are public in my area, and I can
Oh,
see,
wow.
oh, we're having an influx of
Yeah,
warblers. And these warblers, there are a ton of Canada warblers right now, ovenbirds, whoever are coming through, and that allows me to know, when it's a great time to go out and start to try to listen or watch for other kinds
absolutely.
of birds. So
Yeah. And
that's another
any
way of doing
information like that. And
it.
again, you're sharing, you create a community, don't you?
Yes,
It's
for
really important.
sure.
I also have this. This is from my friend Jeff, who lives down the road. It's a little piece of equipment similar to what you're talking about.
Yes.
I put this out in my yard the other day, and he is currently using AI to analyze what has
Mhm.
been flying over my garden at night and during the day.
Uh-huh.
But the day stuff, I know. The night stuff, there are going to be things I
Mhm.
had no idea were flying over
Absolutely.
my garden because other birders in Britain and in the States are using this technology. The clever thing about AI gets a bit of a bad rap, but in the old with the old system, you had to look at the sonogram and work
Mhm.
out, was that a coot
Mhm.
flying over, for
Sure.
example, giving a call. I can't do that. I'm not an expert in sonograms.
Mhm.
This way, the AI does it for you, and you just get a list. And he's about to send me the list, and I'm going to be really shocked by this because it's going to show stuff I had no idea was there.
Technology has opened the door to so many new findings, so many new ways of connecting with our natural world. And I think sometimes technology overall gets a bad rap in that people are like, well, this is a remove, right? I would
Yeah.
argue there's the access that it creates for people with disabilities and other chronic health concerns. And then there's also, I think, the piece of access, which is about making us curious when we learn, like, oh, we think we know our backyard birds. And then we learn, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And I will tell you, I had no idea until technology, for example, that we had a great crested flycatcher that would come through quite regularly at certain times of year. No idea that
Mm.
I should be looking for a great crested flycatcher in this
Yeah.
area. And so it also, I think, promotes that level of curiosity and engagement with our surroundings that helps us to lean into this world, right? This
Yeah.
natural
I
world,
mean,
and to protect it and love it.
as you know, at Ohio, we went to a wonderful talk by the wonderful people from Cornell about Merlin
Mhm.
and eBird, and the Merlin talk was
Yes.
fascinating because so many friends of mine now who are not birders living in London are using Merlin and saying, "Oh my, I had no idea." And then I'm hoping that will lead them to then learn the calls themselves. You're right, there's a danger with technology. I took my 19-year-old daughter to a Bob Dylan concert on Friday in Nottingham. And we saw Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan does not allow you to take a mobile phone in. You can take it in, but you have to have it in a special bag they give you. So the whole concert was not full of people waving their phones or looking at their phones. They were
Mhm.
looking at him and listening to
Mhm.
him. And a lot of people were complaining, and it was like, no, this is great. So, we need to be careful with technology.
Sure,
But for
sure.
me, it's not the technology, it's how we use it. It's like the internet. The internet can be a force for good or not, sadly.
Absolutely.
But when
Both
it is a
and.
force for good, it's
Mhm.
wonderful. And I think that's where technology is working. I'll give you a
Mhm.
simple example.
Please.
We talked earlier about inclusivity and diversity.
Yes.
When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s as a young birder, I knew one other friend who's a dear friend, my daughter's godfather, and he and I birded together. We knew no one else. I was 30 when I met my second birding friend. And that is inconceivable nowadays
Mhm.
because young people, I'm part of a charity here called A Focus on Nature that deals with young people and gives them help and mentoring. Uh,
Mhm.
and a young boy said to me, he was about 12, 13, he said, he said, I thought I was the only birder in my school, in my community. And this is 10 years ago. He said, I went on Facebook
Mhm.
and I found six others and we formed a group.
Mhm.
And to me, that is where the wider technology
Sure,
has really
sure.
worked. And I think what Birdfee offers is interesting. I don't know, but when they started Birdfee, I don't think they would have had any idea that you'd have two big Facebook groups in the States, Birdfee by Nephew and Backyard Birding, and one growing one in Britain. The ones in the States have got thousands, tens of thousands of
Mhm.
people on them, and they're posting stuff. And I went on
Mhm.
there at the beginning of my work. I was asked to help. So if someone had a query, what's
Mhm.
this on my feed? I'm not sure. And I know American birds
Mhm.
reasonably well. So I was answering these questions. And then I realized I didn't need to because the fellow group members were saying, oh, wow, what you've got there is a house finch. You may not have realized, or it's a
Mhm.
pine warbler or whatever. So it was brilliant because people were and are helping
Mhm.
each other and thereby forming a sense of community. And that was
Absolutely.
missing when I was growing up,
Mhm.
literally 50 years ago now,
Mhm.
when I was a young birder. It did not exist. All birders were men.
Mhm.
They were all old and grumpy. No offense. When I say old, they were probably 30 or 40,
Right.
But
At that time, that felt
if you're
different.
12, you find those people quite difficult.
Mhm.
Um, and we created, I think what's happened sort of by accident in the last decade or so is that birding has become, I hope, more diverse, more inclusive, and I think the accessibility we're working on. I
Mhm.
think the first two have happened,
Absolutely.
and the third is happening.
I would argue they are still very much in process here in the
Yeah,
States. We are working constantly on access and inclusion. That's a deep part, as you know, of what Birdability is working towards. And one of the things that all of this makes me think about, Stephen, as you're talking about, youth and being 15 and not having this community of birders yet, and is, the ways in which technology assisted birding enhances the experience of folks who are new to birding. And you mentioned Merlin and our opportunity together to meet with in Ohio, and then I've continued to be in relationship with the folks at Cornell Lab of
yeah,
Ornithology to talk about access, to talk about their technologies. And Merlin is such a brilliant tool, especially for new birders, for folks who are just interested. Everyone that I've introduced to Merlin, who is not a birder, has become fascinated with being able to see on an app what the birds are that are singing or talking, I say talking, calling in their backyards. And that to me is a part of then an opportunity to learn, certainly, but also to parlay that interest into um, hopefully conservation efforts. Because once
yes,
you got interested in birds, you start to care deeply about birds. And then the next thing you know, you're planting native plants in your backyard, or you're trying to, find where is the best carrier of mealworms because you've discovered that's, the thing that will give them a different vitamin or mineral. So you become more interested and engaged you care for the things that you love,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important. I slightly bizarrely, about 2 years ago, I was asked to do a PhD at
Mm,
my university, but they asked me to do one by publication, which meant as my daughter pointed out, you had to write an essay about yourself.
mm,
It's basically about nature writing and the way it had developed and become much more environmentally sensitive. And
mm,
I titled it something that I really believe that I and all of us are, every single one of us here and every birder, beginner or not, around the world, we are evangelists for nature.
mhm,
So our job is to convert other people who may not be interested or may be interested but feel, as so many people do, they won't be, if they go to a nature reserve or a refuge,
mhm.
they won't be wearing the right clothes, they won't be
Right.
carrying the right equipment, all those things, which when we talk about accessibility, of course, the most important side of it is making sure everyone can get there,
Yes.
a physical transport, all those things point of view.
Mhm,
But the other side of accessibility is, a film editor I worked with years ago, and I said, "Oh, have you been to the wetland centre down the road?" Very educated woman,
mhm,
very intelligent, very aware of the environment. And she said, "Oh, I don't think I could go there. I'd feel out of place because I wouldn't
mhm,
have the right equipment." And I said, "No,
mhm.
no, you can go. They organise walks, complete.
Mhm,
You don't have to call yourself a birder." And
mhm,
it always annoys me. I give a lot of talks in Britain, and people, I have to say, mostly women, will say to me, "Oh, I'm not really a proper birder because I only watch birds in my backyard or in my local park." And it's like, well, of course you're a proper birder. But
right.
then they nearly always come up with some extraordinary observation they've made. But they
Mhm,
somehow feel, and this goes back to when birding was so, particularly in Britain, less so in America, I noticed when I went there years ago, very male orientated,
mhm, mhm,
and that changed quicker in America. I would see a lot of couples out, for example.
mhm,
There are obviously lots of social reasons why
mhm,
lone non-males, if you like, lone
mhm.
women,
Yeah. Yep.
lone people of color, all sorts of things,
Mhm,
don't want to go out on their own somewhere. Um,
absolutely.
Something that, again, as a white
Mhm,
man going birding around my local area in Britain, I very rarely feel uncomfortable.
absolutely. That
Happens
is
occasionally, but
sure.
it's
Yeah,
probably I could do it on the fingers of one hand in my life. So, accessibility has all these elements, doesn't it? But
it
what
does.
I do feel is the more people of diverse backgrounds, social class, race, whatever it is, gender, the more people, abilities, whatever, the more
Yeah.
people go out there, the more things start to change. And we've seen this in Britain with, well, I call it football, you call it soccer. I went to a soccer match the other day.
Mhm,
A lot of women now in soccer crowds.
mhm.
There weren't 30 years ago,
I
20
bet.
years ago, really. You know, so
Absolutely.
so things change and then it becomes normal. And when it becomes normal, everyone's fine.
Mhm.
But I
That
get why,
representation, right? That representation, the more
yeah,
we see ourselves
yes,
reflected in a culture, in a subculture, in a group, we feel invited into that group. And I do
yes,
think that that is part of what we're at that turning point, hopefully, around with the work really to create inclusive and accessible birding. So
yeah,
talking deeply about, I love when you were saying, everybody says, oh, I'm not a proper birder. Similar here in the US, actually, I will regularly chat with folks and they will tell me, oh, but I'm not a birder. That's the number one thing we hear. When in fact, everything that they've just described to me is birding,
yeah, of course,
like to a T. And so I think a part of what, certainly technology assisted birding, but also this movement towards
yeah,
inclusion and accessibility it reminds us that birding is any enjoyment of wild birds. And
yeah,
the more we break open the sort of gatekeeping or the really stodgy old concept of who is a birder, the more engaged entire communities become.
yeah.
And that can only be good for the environment and for our communities, right?
A very good friend of mine, Lucy McRobert, who's now in her early 30s, she started birding at the age of about 20 and would go out and she'd find herself, she'd go twitching in particular, listening,
Mm.
going out, big crowd of people, nearly all men. And she was fine. She knew quite a lot of them and they were reasonably friendly. But she said, I always felt I really stood out,
Mm.
you know,
Mhm.
and that is changing. I mean, I know a lot of young people who are into, well, not just birding, they're birders, naturalists, ecologists, the whole range. They blog, they do podcasts, everything. They're
Absolutely.
amazing. And now it's very 50-50,
Yeah. Yeah.
gender wise.
Yeah.
It's not, whereas even 10 years ago, she was saying, and she wrote a piece about fear, and she's a very confident woman. She said to me, she wrote a very good piece about that there was a horrible murder in Britain of a
Mhm.
woman walking home by a policeman. I mean, it was just
Mhm.
absolutely hideous, awful case.
Mhm.
And a lot of women started posting on social media saying, I still feel a bit uncomfortable if I'm out birding on
Mhm.
my own.
Mhm.
And some men were saying, well, why? That's ridiculous. That's stupid, And it was like, and they were doing that usual thing. All men aren't like that because they're not, they wouldn't attack a woman.
Sure.
And the
Well,
point, obviously,
mhm.
is, of course, all
Mhm.
men aren't, but you don't know who's going to be or not going to be. And she did a piece about this and wrote a really good article, which you can find. I think it's on Bird Guide's website. Very open and very, and still got some abuse for it, but basically saying, you have to understand these. And it made me look and think, as I said to you earlier, I don't feel uncomfortable when I'm out on my own,
Mhm.
usually.
Mhm.
Um, and I think what is changing in Britain is there's groups of different
Mhm.
not excluded groups, but for example, there's a wonderful group in Britain
Yeah.
called Flock Together.
Yes.
Two young lads, people of colour, they set up
Mhm.
a thing where they went, we don't know who to go birding with. And we've got friends who sort of think they might want to go birding, but they don't know what
Mhm.
to do. And they might feel a bit uncomfortable,
Mhm.
you know. So they take groups out, but they're very
Absolutely.
inclusive. They don't, you know,
Yeah.
if a friend comes along and says, oh, can I come as well? And they're, white
Oh,
male,
yeah. Come
you know,
along. Yeah.
and I took a group out recently, a group of new birders in Yeovil near me in Somerset, and a guide contacted me and he said, "Look, I've set up an LBGTQ
Mhm.
plus group. Can I? Would you give us any support?" I said, "Right, take you out, go out for a morning, and we'll have
Mhm.
have breakfast afterwards in the local cafe." And bless him, he said, "Oh, we don't have much money. You don't need to pay me for that. It's very sweet,
Mhm.
nice of him to offer. I
Yeah.
like, I always think, I make a living from birding, but
You bet.
I felt that I was really happy. But of course, I had a great time. I was with a lovely group of people,
Absolutely.
including, there were carers, there were people
Yep.
in wheelchairs, there was just a whole range of people.
Yes.
And it didn't matter that primarily it had been set up for one reason.
Yep.
To me, it didn't, it mattered to them, which is great, but it did,
Absolutely.
and,
And it
and
matters in that it centers the
yes, it
experience,
matters in
right?
that
It
they
matters that
feel
it
there's a
makes.
safe space to go
Mhm.
in.
Yes.
But then, because it was a local nature reserve in the middle of this town, Yeovil, which is
Mhm.
a town you wouldn't expect to have this rather lovely sort of walk through along
Mhm.
a stream, where, and they all went, oh, we'll come back next week on our own. And it was like, great, and with Merlin, of course.
Yes.
That's where
Yes.
Merlin went because they can go and they can go, oh, that's a jay calling. Oh, we didn't know, And you talked about Merlin earlier, just
Yeah.
diverging a bit.
Yeah.
We were sitting in our garden last spring when I first got the Merlin app, and my wife said, "What's that at the back?" And I said, "I think it's a kestrel, but it's really distant." So I put it on. Oh yeah, it was a kestrel. I know the bird calls, but I don't
Yeah.
always know, and sometimes you don't
Sure.
even hear them. I go on Merlin
Yeah.
and go, "Really? I didn't hear that." And I listen for a bit and think, "Oh yeah, it's
Oh,
over,
there it is, way back.
Dunnock calling or a wren or whatever."
Mhm.
Um, and I think it works. It's just a tool. It's a tool that works
Yes.
very well. Cornell, hats off to Cornell. Everything's
Yes.
free. It all works.
Mhm.
And it adds value because we put in, like with eBird, we put in where we
Yeah,
saw something, so it helps conservation. So for
absolutely.
me, and this is what we're trying to do with bird feed, we're trying to, by giving this money back to this fund
Mhm.
and encouraging people, we hope that it will feel like it does feel like a community of users. And once people get it, they don't want, it's rather like with Merlin, they don't want to go back, because once you've got it
Absolutely.
on your phone, it becomes slightly addictive. You want to just check what was there earlier. And I had a long-tailed tit, which is a very beautiful little bird. It's a bit like a bush tit or something. And when I was in China again, I looked at it and said, "Oh, that's funny. I hadn't seen that in the garden this year, but I'm seeing it on my phone. I'm 5,000 miles away. Can I tick that on my list?"
Recognizing the return.
It's live,
Yes,
I'm seeing
yes.
it. Is it different looking through binoculars from 10 feet away or
Right.
a phone from 5,000 miles away?
Right. It's such a, there are so many things that you were just talking about that are really important threads for us and to follow through. And one of the things I just wanted to acknowledge was, at Birdability, we have the Birdability map, which is an opportunity. It's a crowdsourced map of sites around the country and around the world, actually, that someone has taken the time to detail the access information about
Yeah,
slope
absolutely.
of and grade of the path. What kind of material is the path? Are there bathrooms? Is there a guide rope, for example, for someone who is blind or low vision? But we also have an important question on there about safety. What are the things that we should know? Putting yourself not in your own experience, but into the sort of empathetic experience of many others. What are the pieces around that? Because it is not possible to have something accessible that is not also safe. And so
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's important. And I love the just the ways that those culturally specific groups are centering, right? Birdability is doing this. We're centering the needs of folks who have disabilities and other chronic health issues. But our outings are absolutely open to and frequented by able-bodied folks as well,
Yeah.
because they also value being in community with folks
Yes.
with disabilities. And so I think that's a really important thing. And I wanted to just name a thing that Merlin has done that has been spectacular, which is that when we had at Birdability, we work with the Environment for the Americas and the National Park Service, and we have uh, six interns at national parks across the country. And those interns are all folks with a lived experience of disability who are then creating programming for folks with
Brilliant.
disabilities. And one of our interns is a deaf intern from Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., which is a deaf university, and had not known about Merlin. And it was such a new tool for her and for the folks that she led on these outings, because they could use Merlin to detect sounds of birds around them, which they then knew to look for when they
Yes.
themselves would never be able to hear them because they are deaf.
Oh,
What
yeah.
an amazing use,
Yeah.
right, of this technology to be able to know, oh, gosh, there are a whole bunch of cowbirds. I'm not seeing them. Well, now I know to look for them. And
Yeah.
it's just the one of the things that is so terrific about birding technology are the ways that it ends up being used that were never the intended, right?
Yeah.
Sort of outcome, but that end up creating more access, more community, more opportunity for sometimes those most marginalized groups that we're talking about.
Yeah. And also for the other people there
Yeah.
who aren't deaf, they're going to suddenly think, ah, I would never have thought of that. You thought
Mhm.
that. You have Dancing with the Stars, don't you, in the States?
We do.
We have Strictly Come Dancing, which was the original.
Mhm.
Um, yours is probably better, but we have it. 2 years ago, a young woman came on. You know that you have a celebrity,
Mhm.
an actor often, or someone,
Mhm.
and the professional dancer.
Yes.
And the celebrity was a young deaf actor,
Mhm.
and she won. And this year they have this is really extraordinary. And they did this brilliant thing in it where they cut the music completely at one point in her dance so that people at home were put in her position.
I remember seeing this actually, a
And
clip of
they did
it.
it last week. There's a guy called Chris McCausland. He is a blind comedian, very funny guy. He is on it this year, and they cut the lights completely for 10 seconds. The whole audience couldn't see, and the TV audience at home couldn't see. They put it back on and said, that's what he has to experience. And I think, again, as you say, this is where the technology can help, in that we can, by using things like Merlin or things like Birdfeed,
Yes.
the app, we can, even by showing it to someone, I used to show it to my aunt. She died last year, but when I first got it, I would take it into her care home and show her the birds on my feeder that she couldn't see. And I, therefore had more empathy with her state at that point,
Yes.
and I, this sounds blindingly obvious, and it's probably blindingly obvious to, a lot of you, but if you are a privileged, able-bodied white male, as I am, you need a bit of a nudge sometimes. You need to put yourself in other people's position. And I think for me in recent years, meeting so many different people who are into birds of different ages, of different, as I say, genders, races, backgrounds, whatever, and it becoming a more diverse thing. And this happens to me every year at a big event, which I would really recommend that any of your viewers come to, if you can afford to come over to Britain, is the Global Bird Fair, which is truly an astonishing thing. I've been going for 32 years now. We missed the two, of course, during COVID. But for me, it's the weekend of the year. It's in mid-July. And I meet every year, as I did with you in Ohio, these events like that, like the Southwest Wings Festival in Arizona that I'll be going to next August, run by my friend Chris, who's Brit, who married Mari, an American. They run that. I'll be going there. And when you meet like-minded people from somewhere else, who are into birds, who have a different perspective on the world from you, but you share one really important thing, and that is a love of birds. Absolutely. And I think that, if we can use technology properly, and I think we are, I think at Birdfeed, I think we're still interested. If people say, well, we'd love this facility on it, or that works very well for most people, but not for me. Great, tell us. Because if we know, what I've learned with the NetView team is, if I say, well, that isn't quite working, they change it, if someone else says that, they are always looking for feedback, because they don't just design a product, put it out there and say, oh, that's it, off you go.
Right.
That's why Birdfeed 2 is happening and all these. But fingers crossed, I think this is happening, and this is these big events. I think in COVID we realized how much we missed, and this is great, doing something online and hearing from people, talking to people, talking to you. It's a miracle we can do this, but meeting up face to face, if you're able to, having access to that, is just an amazing thing.
And I think the thing that is so important when we think about technology assisted birding, when we think about virtual gatherings, when we think about, the joy of being physically in community with each other, is the both and of it. We don't have to stop doing one to be able to do the other, right? Like, that's one of the things that is so joyful. We can both gather in community and continue doing virtual events, which are far more accessible for folks with disabilities. We can both use burfies and haiku boxes and, feeder cams and all of those things, and also still be deeply invested in being in nature and being with the birds whenever we can. Those things can live and should live side by side. And the more we think about that both andness, I think the more we can embrace all of the different ways and give folks options for how
Yes.
they engage with
No,
bird.
definitely. I mean, I ran for 8 years. I just
Yeah.
retired last year. I ran a master's degree in nature
Mhm.
writing, nature and
Yes,
travel
yes.
writing. And I don't know why, because I inherited it from someone else, but the course ran like no other course, as I found in the world, where we ran it. It wasn't entirely online.
Mhm.
It was mostly, this is before COVID, it's mostly online, but we would meet 3 times over the 2 years
Yes,
for
yes.
about 5 days. And what
Mhm.
happened was you created this extraordinary community, but almost everyone on that course was either, there were people with chronic health issues, there were people who were carers, there were
Yes.
people who were single parents, there were people who lived too far away,
Yes.
lived in America, we had people from America, Canada,
Mhm.
Thailand, and what
Mhm.
was one, it's still running by the way, but what was wonderful about
Wonderful.
this course was that I would say 80%, perhaps more, of the people on it would not have been able to be on it if it was you have to come to the city of Bath once
Yeah,
a week in term on a Tuesday.
absolutely.
You know,
I so
and so by
appreciate
being
that. Yes.
flexible, but the flexibility of it was they
Mm.
did meet and they met in the first week, spent 5 days together and became firm friends. And the legacy of that course, so
Yeah.
many people writing books. And in fact, the fellow course, the parallel course that's been running for longer, the creative writing course, which is basically novel writing at Bath Spa. Yesterday, we heard that one of my colleagues, Samantha, who was a former student
Yes.
of the course, Samantha Harvey, won the Booker Prize, which is the biggest
Amazing.
literary prize, apart from the Nobel Prize,
Mhm.
in the world. And it's
Mhm.
one of our, effectively one of our former students, tutors, colleagues. And, for me, writing about nature, this is a very personal thing, but writing about nature is the thing that defines me. Everything
Mhm.
else I love doing. I love making television programs. I love giving talks, all that. But in the end, it's the writing for me because there's something permanent about it. And to
Mhm.
be able to, again, using
Mhm.
technology, because we were using a very early form of Zoom.
Yes.
This is 8 years ago. We were using a thing called Google
Yes.
Hangout.
Yes.
And I'd never heard of it before we started. And it was a student of mine said, "Oh, there's this thing called Google Hangout, so we could meet online." And we were like, "Oh, is there?"
What a brilliant thing.
And
And
this is 2015. It's only not.
right, right. And what
And
joy now to be using Zoom, which is like the next level,
yes,
right? Many folks had never even heard of Zoom prior to 2020. And here we are able to use it to connect with each other across the country and across the ocean. Stephen,
yes.
thank you so much for being here. Estelle, thank you for joining us. I know it is like 4 in the morning in China where you
And
are.
she's
We're
not very
still
well. She's
I
got
know. We're
flu. I hope
so
you're with
grateful.
your very lovely cat, Estelle.
Yes, and I am going to stop recording, and then we're going to give away a Burfy feeder to somebody
Lovely.
who is here on the call today. So I am just going to uh, stop recording. I will say thank you again to
Well,
the
thank you. It's
Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation and to you, Stephen, for being here. And we're so grateful for this opportunity to be in space together through the Birdability Outreach
it's
Program.